Hey, what's up guys? John here. So amazing news for California real estate investors, people that own property in California just got a huge break because they keep putting the clamps on us and doing everything they possibly do to increase taxes and take freedoms and liberties away from property owners in California. So for those that don't know what rent control is and how California real estate works, it's just so different than nearly everywhere else in the country. So in California, we have something called rent control. And what rent control is it's a series of guidelines that landlords have to operate under to do business in the state of California. Now, when you own a property that's 1980 or older, it's under rent control. Now, rent control, they can tell you how much you can increase rent by if you have a tenant in place. And if you're in Florida, let me give you an example. If you're in Florida and you sign a 1-year lease, at the end of that 1-year lease, then the landlord could say, I'm going to increase the rent, or I'm not going to renew the lease, or I'd rather you move out in 30 days. Well, in California, if you sign a 1-year lease, at the end of that 1-year lease, the tenant has the option to extend that lease. And they can do so at a fixed increase. If the landlord decides to increase the rent, it could be 3% or 5%. It varies due to what the freedom that the state issues the landlord at that given time. So let me give you an example. Let's say that you have a property in California and you're really good friends with a tenant there, and you signed a lease in 1990 for, say, $500. And every single year, you never increase the rent. So now the rent is probably $3,000, and you want to sell the property. But if you were to go ahead and do that with the low rents, it would really impact you on a sale. So you can't tell the tenant to move out, or you can't increase the rent. You're very restricted. You're very, very restricted in terms of what you can do. And that is California. That's California for you. Now, in addition to that, if you have a landlord issue, tenant issue, and you want to go to court, for you to go to court, it might cost you $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 to get proper representation as a landlord. A tenant would actually get free representation through many tenant advocacy networks. And that's just how California works. Now, they tried to pass 2 measures that just failed. And thank God they did. Because if they did, all it would do is push out all of these, investors that are kind of on the sidelines with California. California has so much great going for it. And the last thing that we'd want to see is more people fleeing. What California really needs to increase supply and decrease the cost of living is more favorable zoning policies and zoning laws and less tax. They need to incentivize people to develop and build property rather than trying to control and mandate who can live where and what you can charge for your units and what you can do. Because ultimately, when you have a sea of properties and you are incentivizing people not to move out by keeping rents very, very low, then ultimately these people don't leave and there's less housing supply available. If there's less housing supply available than what is available, it's going to be sky high. It's going to be unaffordable for everybody else. So California has a lot of work to do. But these 2 laws that just failed, thank God they did it. Prop 15 and Prop 21, I'm going to go over in this video. So Prop 15, how this works is if you have a commercial property, and commercial is 5 units or more, and it's valued at $3 million or more, then they would increase the taxes to that level. Now let me give you an example. Let's say that you are from a working class family and your dad owns a laundromat. And this laundromat, he inherited from his dad, and at the time they paid $150,000 for it. Paid $150,000. Now, the property is maybe worth $3.5 million because it's, many decades ago you purchased it at $300,000 or $150,000. And your tax base is very, very, very low on this property. Now they want to increase the taxes up to $3 million. And so if you're $3.5 million, you pay roughly $37,000, $38,000 a year in tax. And if you have some low-income tenants in that building that are only paying $500 or $1,000 or whatever they're paying, and your cost base changes, you're going to want to increase rents. And if you can't, then you could almost lose the property in foreclosure, or if you don't have the equity, you might have to force sell it. And at that point in time, you're not able to pass it along to your children. And it becomes a snowball of poverty for a lot of working class families. And then you have the Blackstones and all these big private equity companies that will run out and buy all these properties because it's supply and demand. If there's a ton of these commercial properties out there that are being forced for sale, then prices are going to come down. It's going to be a great opportunity for investors to go out there and acquire properties. Now, Prop 21 is amazing, and thank God it did not pass. It failed by a pretty large margin. About 60% of voters said no to Prop 21. I'm going to read Prop 21 verbatim to you because it's very important, because they try to push this nearly every single election. So we should kind of be aware of what they're trying to do and what they're trying to push for the state of California. So Proposition 21 would have replaced the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act. Costa-Hawkins was passed in 1995. Prior to the enactment of Costa-Hawkins, local governments were permitted to enact rent control, provided that landlords would receive just and reasonable returns for the rental properties. Costa-Hawkins continued to allow local governments to use rent control except on housing that was first occupied after February 1st, 1995. Housing units with distinct titles such as condos, townhouses, and single-family homes. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The ballot measure would have allowed local governments to adopt rent control on housing units except on housing that was first occupied within 15 years and owned by natural persons, meaning not in a corporation or an LLC, like your own name, who own no more than 2 housing units with separate titles such as single-family homes, condos, and some duplexes, or subdivided interests such as stock cooperatives or community apartment projects. Under Costa-Hawkins, landlords were allowed to increase rent prices to market rates when a tenant moves out, a policy known as vacancy decontrol. The ballot measure would have required local governments to adopt rent control to allow landlords to increase rental rates by 15% during the first 3 years following a vacancy. You could see how California works and how they're trying to mold California into almost like a socialist type of state. It's very, very unfortunate the direction that they were attempting to take California, and I'm very pleased that this got rejected. So very, very good news for California real estate. And I'm going to keep my fingers on the pulse of California real estate. I'm an investor in California, and I'm on the fence right now of saying, you know what, enough is enough. But because this failed, this is actually really good news for me, and it gives me a vote of confidence. In California right now, especially Los Angeles, I'm seeing rent reductions roughly between 20 and 30% from where they were just 9 months ago. That is a huge margin. Generally, rents were increasing 3 to 5% a year. So 20 to 30% reduction so far is massive. In addition to that, we're going to have more and more, I believe, rent reductions coming in the next 2 to 3 months, because I think more people are going to say, you know what, California is a very expensive place to live, and if I can move somewhere more cost effective, then it makes more sense for me to do that, especially if I can work that same job through Zoom. And they're going to be planning for 2021. So if we're in a lockdown, or we're in another, I believe, grip of mandates where you can't operate and really enjoy the amenities in California, then what's the point of being here? So I think more people will leave, and there'll be less demand for these units. Prices will have to come down. Rent will have to come down. So really good news for all California real estate investors, and I'll see you guys next video.